this video, I want to give you an overview of some of the key points of giving solid conference presentations. And it's based on a lot of experience I have going to conferences and seeing presentations done well and not so well. Specifically, I'm going to cover these things, the things your presentation should address. And this is what you should cover in your presentation, what you're going to talk about, why you chose that topic, what questions or hypotheses you're looking into, the methods you used, what you found, and then what those findings mean. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit on each of those points. So first question you want to answer for your audience is, what are you there to talk about? So this is your typical introduction. It can be fairly straightforward. You want to briefly overview the project, just give them a brief sense, and then preview what you're going to be covering. Then once you get into the first part of the body, you want to talk about, okay, why this topic? So this is where you might go over some of the key concepts you're studying, and also remember a lot of the audience may not know those concepts, so you want to briefly explain the key concepts. If you have a huge literature review or tons of concepts, try to narrow it down to the most essential ones. You do not have to cover everything in your presentation that you've covered in your paper. That's going to be a key theme throughout this video. So, what does the literature say? And then when you overview that, well, where are the gaps in the literature? What hasn't been addressed? And how does your study address that void in the research? So it's a kind of parallel to what your literature review would be, except you're going to do it more quickly. You're not going to dive into all the detail that you would in your literature review. So at this point, you've introduced things, you've touched upon some of the key concepts in the literature, you've talked about why there was a need to do your study and how your study aims to fill that need. And then you want to kind of wrap that section up by talking about what research questions or hypotheses you were investigating with your project. This can be fairly brief too, and one thing I'll add is that if you have a lot of hypotheses or research questions, this is probably mainly people who are doing a quantitative project, but it could be qualitative too. But if you have a lot of hypotheses and research questions, you can summarize more broadly. You do not have to go into excruciating detail about every single hypothesis or question. So again, we just want the audience to get a sense of what you were predicting or what questions you were investigating. From there, you go into the methods. How did you go about studying this? And again, as I keep saying, you don't need a ton of detail. They can get that in your paper, or they can follow up with questions afterward. But give them the highlights. So, you know, we surveyed people, asked them certain questions, or did interviews and asked them certain questions, chose certain artifacts to study, and looked for whatever in those artifacts. What kind of analysis did you do? For quantitative, some of the, you surveyed people. Who did you survey? And what are some of the questionnaires they completed? Or if you did an experiment, just outline some of the details of that. So you want to cover all the bases fairly completely, but you still don't have to go into quite as much detail as you do in your paper. So you don't have to go into giving examples of items from each scale you use. Just say they filled out questionnaire a questionnaire on their satisfaction in the workplace, their satisfaction with their manager, so on and so forth. Or we interviewed people and asked some general questions along the lines of, what is your experience as an employee in this organization, those types of things. Or you looked at the following types of artifacts. So anyway, you want to give people a sense of how you did your research, but it doesn't have to include every single thing. Then what you found. Now, this is going to vary depending on the type of project you have. Many of you will have themes that you're reporting on. Some of you will have statistical findings, or there could be other types of things that you have in your results. So in here, you want to hit on what are the themes that we found in the data, or what were the general findings. And then this is where it's hard to give you a one-size-fits-all piece of advice, because you may have a lot of findings. You may have found a lot of themes or a lot of statistical findings. So if you have a large number of results, I would focus on your key results. You don't have to go into every relationship between every variable, so every correlation you don't have to report on. Or if you have a lot of themes, maybe just report on the most significant themes. And then just a little bit additional, when you're presenting statistics, people aren't going to understand the numbers so much as the concept that one thing is related to another. So it's okay to, even if you offer the numbers, I would offer some context. You know, whether it's a color-coded chart or a chart that just says, list the strong relationships, the moderate ones, the weak ones, the ones that were non-significant. There are a lot of ways you could do it. But remember, your audience is not a room full of people who are statistical experts. If this was a real conference, you probably could get away with a little bit more of that because the expertise level in the room is a little higher. But for a general graduate level presentation, you don't necessarily have to get into that kind of detail, unless it's a class where everyone is supposed to be presenting on that kind of detail. So, focus on the key highlights. And then elaborate, offer some context. And this can be either when you're presenting your findings or kind of afterwards, like a discussion section of a paper. So what were the big takeaways? What can we learn? What are the practical implications? What does this mean for future research? There isn't any one thing you have to do here, but it would be good. You've put all this work into it. People have sat through this many minutes of your presentation. So if you could give them some kind of takeaways, like this is something useful we gained from having discussed this or having learned it, that type of thing. If you can do that, then you'll end with more momentum. You'll feel better rather than getting to the end of the results saying, so I have these correlations, or I found these themes, and well, that's about it. You can see how that's going to be an empty feeling. So just try to offer something useful at the end. Now, everything that preceded this slide was about what to cover. Here are a few things I want to encourage you to consider about how to cover it. I would encourage you to be conversational, still professional, but just talk to your audience. I would try to avoid reading things to us unless it's a direct quotation or a very specific result. Then that's understandable. But I would try to just talk to your audience and present your findings to them, kind of share with them what you found. To help do this, I would encourage you to make sure you are engaged and enthusiastic about what you're presenting. So before you even come in, think about, okay, what do I really appreciate about this topic, about this project? What are, kind of what makes me enthusiastic about it? If you do that first, if you adjust your attitude so that you see kind of the great aspects of your project, or at least the better aspects of your project, that's going to show in how you deliver it. Now you're going to be looking forward to sharing that with an audience. And then, as I've hinted at throughout, I would keep in mind that this is a presentation, not a paper. In a paper, you put all of the detail, you put everything, and we get on your case if you don't. In a presentation, you're providing the highlights of each section, so you don't have to cover everything. People always can go back and read your paper, and if you didn't cover enough, they can ask you questions at the end. So, and as it says there, I've never heard anybody regret not hearing more about the literature review or wishing that there were more statistics. It is okay to leave people wanting a little bit more. And then, I don't have it on here, but it's kind of another attitude kind of thing. If there are any areas that you have concerns about, like your findings, how do I frame this, how do I talk about this talk with your advisor well in advance of your presentation. You want to be able to feel good about what you're walking in and talking about. So if you have concerns, address those well before the day of the presentation. Then you'll feel good. Then you're just coming in and you're talking about what you did. You're sharing it with people. It's like graduate student show and tell. So with that in mind, I hope these guidelines are helpful, and I hope you're able to really just come in and enjoy sharing what you did with everyone else.